The DNA test results trembled in my hands, the paper making a sound like dried leaves as I stood frozen in my kitchen. The words 0% biological match blurred through my tears as I stared at what should have been a simple ancestry report, connecting me to the woman I'd called mother for 62 years. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the granite counter, feeling the cold stone bite into my palms as the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story today. I am curious, what part of the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments below. All right, let us dive into what happened to me. My coffee mug crashed to the floor, sending ceramic shards skittering across the tiles. The brown liquid spread like a stain across my perfectly clean kitchen, but I couldn't move to clean it. My whole body had gone numb except for the pounding in my chest that felt like it might crack my ribs. I'd ordered this test 3 weeks ago as a birthday present to myself, excited to trace my African heritage back through the generations. Instead, I'd discovered I had no connection to anyone in my family tree. The front door slammed, and I heard footsteps in the hallway. My sister Patricia burst into the kitchen, her eyes wild, her normally pressed blazer askew. She must have driven straight from her office downtown, must have gotten the same email notification from the DNA company. "Tell me you haven't opened it yet," she said, her voice cracking. I held up the paper, watching her face drain of color. Patricia grabbed the edge of my kitchen table, her manicured nails digging into the wood. She was 58, 4 years younger than me, and we'd shared everything our entire lives. The same wide-set brown eyes, the same high cheekbones, the same gap between our front teeth. Except according to the test, we shared nothing at all. "We need to talk to Mom," Patricia whispered. I grabbed my car keys from the hook, my hands still shaking so badly the metal jangled against itself. Patricia followed me to the garage, neither of us speaking as we climbed into my sedan. The 15-minute drive to our mother's house felt like hours. Every red light made me want to scream. Every turn brought back memories of childhood, of birthday parties, and scraped knees and bedtime stories. All of it now wrapped in a suffocating layer of lies. I pulled into the driveway of the house where I'd grown up, the tires crunching over gravel that Mom had laid down just last summer. The white paint on the shutters was peeling near the corners, something I'd noticed 100 times but never really seen until now. Everything looked different through the lens of deception. Patricia was out of the car before I'd even turned off the engine. She marched toward the front door with her fists clenched at her sides, her shoulders rigid as iron beams. I caught up to her on the porch steps, grabbing her elbow to slow her down. "We can't just storm in there," I said, though my own pulse hammered in my temples. Patricia yanked her arm free and twisted the doorknob. The smell of cinnamon rolls hit me as we entered, that familiar sweetness that had welcomed me home 1,000 times before. Now it made my stomach turn. Mom was in the kitchen, her back to us, humming something low and tuneless as she wiped down the counters. She turned when she heard our footsteps, a smile spreading across her weathered face. The smile died the instant she saw our expressions. The dish towel slipped from her fingers and landed on the linoleum with a soft thump. "What's wrong?" she asked, but her voice was too careful, too measured. I pulled the DNA results from my purse and placed them on the kitchen table between us. Mom stared at the paper without moving closer, without reaching for it. My hands found the edge of the sink behind her, gripping it so hard her knuckles went pale. "When were you going to tell us?" Patricia's voice came out like shattered glass. Mom's chest rose and fell in rapid succession. Sweat beaded at her hairline despite the cool air conditioning. She opened her mouth twice before any sound emerged. "I need to sit down." She moved to the table like someone walking through deep water, each step slow and deliberate. I remained standing, my arms crossed over my chest, feeling the wild thump of my heart against my forearms. Patricia positioned herself by the doorway, blocking the only exit. Mom sank into her chair and pressed both palms flat against the table. The overhead light caught the age spots on her hands, the wrinkles around her wedding ring. She was 79 years old, and in that moment, she looked every day of it. "There was a fire," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward, my fingers digging into the back of the chair across from her. Patricia shifted her weight, and the floorboard beneath her creaked in the silence. "What fire?" I demanded. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She pulled her hands off the table and folded them in her lap, out of sight, where I couldn't see them trembling. In Detroit, October 1962. A tenement building on the east side burned down. Your father and we were living in Ann Arbor then, trying for years to have children. The doctor said it was impossible. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the chair harder, my knuckles turning white. Mom continued, her words coming faster now, like water through a broken dam. "We read about it in the newspaper. 5 families displaced. A baby found in the rubble, maybe 6 months old, no parents, no relatives coming forward. The authorities were overwhelmed. Your father had connections at the hospital where they took you. You stole me." The words ripped out of my throat. "We saved you," Mom said, her voice rising for the first time. She stood up, her chair scraping backward. "You would have gone into the system, bounced from home to home. We gave you love, stability, everything." Patricia moved away from the door and came to stand beside me. Her hand found my shoulder, squeezing once. "And me?" Patricia asked. Mom's face crumpled. She pressed her fingertips against her temples, shaking her head back and forth like she could erase the question. "Different circumstances, different year, but the same gift." I lunged forward, my chair clattering backward onto the linoleum. My hands slammed down on the table, making the teacups jump and spill amber liquid across the floral tablecloth. The heat from the tea soaked through the fabric, burning my palms, but I didn't move them. "What gift?" My voice came out raw, barely recognizable as my own. "You kidnapped 2 babies and called it a gift?" Mom backed against the kitchen counter, her spine pressed against the edge. The overhead light cast shadows under her eyes, making her look hollow, ancient. She reached behind her, her fingers fumbling for something, anything to hold on to. They found the handle of the refrigerator and clenched around it. Patricia moved past me, her footsteps deliberate and measured. She walked to the window above the sink and stared out into the darkness. Her reflection in the glass showed a face I'd known my entire life, but suddenly felt stranger than a stranger's. We'd grown up in the same house, shared the same bedroom until I was 10, fought over clothes and boys and the last slice of pie. Now that shared history felt like tissue paper, ready to tear at the slightest touch. "Where?" I asked. "Where did you get her?" "Chicago, 1964. A hospital mix-up that nobody wanted to investigate too closely." Mom's voice had gone flat, mechanical. She released the refrigerator handle and moved to the kitchen drawer beside the stove. Her hands shook as she pulled it open. Inside lay a jumble of rubber bands, old receipts, broken pencils. She pushed them aside, digging deeper, and withdrew a small metal lockbox covered in rust spots. I watched her hands work the combination lock. 3 spins right, 2 left, 1 right again. The numbers looked worn, the paint rubbed away by decades of her fingers tracing the same pattern. The lock clicked open. Inside lay 2 hospital bracelets, yellowed with age. 2 birth certificates with names I'd never heard before. A newspaper clipping so old the paper had turned brown and brittle at the edges. Mom lifted the clipping out with both hands, treating it like something sacred or cursed. I couldn't tell which. She placed it on the table between the spreading tea stain. I leaned forward, my breath catching. The headline read, "Tenement Fire Claims 3 Lives." Beneath it, a grainy photograph showed a building reduced to charred beams and rubble. My eyes scanned the text, looking for my own history written in someone else's tragedy. Patricia appeared at my shoulder, reading over me. Her breathing had gone shallow and quick. I could feel the tension radiating from her body, could smell the sharp scent of her fierce sweat mixing with me perfume. "Baby girl, approximately 6 months old, found in second-floor apartment," I read aloud. "No identification. Parents presumed deceased. Child transferred to Detroit General Hospital." My finger traced down to the date. October 18th, 1962. I did the math in my head, subtracting backward, adding forward. The numbers aligned with the birthday I'd celebrated my entire life. April 1962, 6 months before the fire. I straightened up, my spine cracking from the sudden movement. My hands found the edge of the table again, needing something solid to anchor to. The room spun slightly, the walls pressing in. "The bracelet," I said, pointing at the lockbox. "Let me see it." Mom reached in with trembling fingers and lifted out the smaller of the 2 bracelets. The plastic had yellowed and cracked with age, but I could still read the handwritten information. Female infant, Dob unknown, approx. 6 months. No name, no mother's name, no father's name. Just clinical observations about weight and length and the location of a small birthmark on the left shoulder blade. My left hand moved automatically to my right shoulder, then corrected, sliding over to touch the raised patch of skin on my left side. I'd always been told it was just one of those things, a quirk of genetics. Now it was evidence, a marker connecting me to a bracelet in a box, to a fire in a city I'd never called home. Patricia grabbed the second bracelet before Mom could stop her. She held it up to the light, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping beneath her skin. "Baby girl, Illinois General Hospital," she read. "That's all it says, not even an approximate age." "You were 3 days old," Mom whispered. "There was a nurse who owed your father a favor. She said there had been complications during delivery, that the mother was unstable, violent. She tried to hurt you. Child services was involved, but the paperwork was a mess. Your father said we could help, said we could give you a better life." I slammed my fist down on the table. The teacups jumped again, one of them tipping over completely, sending a waterfall of cold tea onto the floor. The ceramic shattered when it hit the linoleum, shards scattering across the yellowed tiles like shrapnel. "Her name," I said. "My mother's name. Tell me." Mom's face went blank, her eyes focusing on something far away, somewhere I couldn't reach her. She shook her head slowly, mechanically, back and forth. "I don't know. We never asked." We didn't want to know. I lunged across the table, my hands grabbing the edges of the photo box before Mom could pull it away. The cardboard buckled under my grip, and several more photographs spilled out, cascading across the table's surface like fallen leaves. My fingers scrabbled through them, shoving aside images of birthday parties and school photos that now felt like props in an elaborate stage production. Patricia moved beside me, her shoulder pressing against mine as we sorted through the chaos. Her breathing was sharp and rapid, matching the frantic rhythm of my own heartbeat. A manila envelope at the bottom of the box caught my attention, the paper thick and official looking, its edges worn soft with age. I ripped it open. The documents inside were photocopies. The text faded, but still legible. Hospital admission forms. A discharge summary dated March 15th, 1962. My supposed birthday. But the name on the patient line made my vision blur. Rebecca Thornton, I read aloud. The words felt like stones in my mouth. Mom lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers away. I jerked backward, my chair scraping violently against the floor as I stumbled to my feet. The documents crumpled in my fist as I held them away from her reaching hands. "You said you didn't know," Patricia hissed. She grabbed Mom's wrist mid-reach, twisting it down with enough force to make the older woman gasp. "You said you never asked for a name." "I didn't. That came later." Years later. Mom's voice cracked. "Your father kept tabs. He said we needed insurance, something to protect ourselves if anyone ever came looking." I smoothed out the discharge papers on the counter, my hands trembling so badly the words seemed to dance across the page. Rebecca Thornton, 23 years old, admitted for psychological evaluation following violent incident. Patient displayed symptoms of postpartum psychosis. Infant removed from custody by Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. The clinical language made my stomach heave. I pressed my palm flat against the counter to steady myself, feeling the cool laminate beneath my skin. A photograph had been paperclipped to the back of the discharge summary. A Polaroid, its colors faded to ghostly pastels. The woman in the image sat in a hospital bed, her dark hair hanging limp around a face that could have been carved from marble. But her eyes... God, her eyes were mine. The same shape, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners. She stared directly at the camera with an expression that transcended anger or fear. It was pure, distilled desperation. "She looks like me." My voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. Patricia leaned over my shoulder, her breath hot against my neck. She didn't say anything, but I felt her body go rigid beside me. The resemblance was undeniable, screaming out from the faded photograph like an accusation. I spun around to face Mom, the photo clutched in my hand. I had backed herself against the refrigerator, her hands pressed flat against the white surface as if trying to merge with it, to disappear into the appliances and wallpaper of her kitchen. "Where is she now?" I demanded. "Where is Rebecca Thornton?" "I don't know. I swear I don't know." I crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. My free hand slammed against the refrigerator beside her head, denting the metal with a hollow boom that echoed through the kitchen. Mom flinched, tears streaming down her cheeks, but I couldn't stop. 62 years of believing in a foundation that never existed burned through my veins like acid. "Your father tried to find her. About 10 years after we took you. He said he wanted to make sure she wouldn't be a problem." Mom's words tumbled out in a rush. "The hospital had no forwarding address. She'd been released 6 months after you were born. Signed herself out against medical advice. Just vanished." Patricia pulled me back, her fingers digging into my upper arm with bruising force. I let her, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining from my body and leaving nothing but hollow trembling in its wake. "There's more in that box," Mom said quietly. "Letters. He kept letters." I dumped the remaining contents of the photo box onto the kitchen table. Envelopes cascaded out, maybe 20 or 30 of them, all addressed in the same careful, slanting handwriting. No return addresses. The postmarks showed different cities: Chicago, Springfield, Peoria, spanning nearly a decade. My fingers fumbled with the first envelope. The letter inside was written on lined notebook paper, the edges ragged where it had been torn from a spiral binding. "To whoever has my daughter, I know you think you saved her from me. Maybe you did, but she's mine, my blood. my flesh. Tell her I never wanted to hurt her. Tell her the shadows weren't real. Tell her I'm sorry. The paper slipped from my numb fingers, floating down to join the scattered photographs and documents covering the table. Patricia picked it up, her eyes scanning the words rapidly. "She was looking for you," she said. "All those years, she was looking." I grabbed another envelope, tearing it open with shaking hands. The paper inside felt thinner, more delicate, as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times before being sealed away. "I saw you today. Well, I saw a girl who might be you. She was at the library on Michigan Avenue with an older couple. She had my eyes, your grandmother's nose. I followed you for 3 blocks before the voices told me to stop. They said I'd ruin everything. They're probably right. The date at the top showed 15 years ago. I would have been 47. Living in Chicago with Mom and Dad. No, with Robert and Eleanor Jones." My stomach lurched violently, and I pressed my palm flat against the table to steady myself. Patricia moved behind me, reading over my shoulder. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts against the back of my neck. I reached for another letter, then another, spreading them across the table in chronological order. The handwriting deteriorated as the years progressed, becoming more erratic, the lines slanting wildly across the pages. The medication makes everything fuzzy, but I remember. I remember your tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I remember how you smelled like powder and milk. They said I tried to drown you, but that's a lie. I was washing you. Just washing you. The water was too hot, and you cried, and then they took you away. My throat constricted. I looked up at the woman I'd called Mom for 62 years. She stood frozen by the counter, her face ashen, one hand pressed against her sternum as if she could physically hold her heart in place. "Did she try to drown me?" The words came out flat, stripped of emotion. "The hospital record said," Mom started. "I asked you, not some hospital report, you. Did my mother try to drown me?" She flinched at the emphasis I placed on my mother. Her lips trembled, and she wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking much older than her 86 years. "She filled the bathtub and put you under. A neighbor heard you screaming and broke down the door. That's what the social worker told us." I rifled through the remaining papers in the box. My fingers found a thick manila folder near the bottom, bent and creased from years of storage. I yanked it free and flipped it open. Official letterhead from Illinois Department of Children and Family Services stared back at me. Pages of psychiatric evaluations. Court documents. A termination of parental rights order signed by a judge whose signature had faded to a barely visible scrawl. Patricia leaned in, her shoulder pressed against mine, anchoring me to something solid as I scanned the documents. The diagnosis jumped out at me from multiple pages: postpartum psychosis with severe depression and dissociative episodes. Recommended treatment: inpatient psychiatric care for minimum 6 months. Patient refused treatment. Patient became combative when infant was removed from her care. A black and white photocopy of a driver's license had been paperclipped to one of the evaluation forms. I stared at the face in the tiny photo. My face, but younger, harder, with dark circles under eyes that looked simultaneously vacant and terrified. The name beneath read, Lorraine Mitchell, Dube, March 15th, 1944. "Lorraine," I whispered. The name felt foreign on my tongue, yet somehow inevitable. My mother's name was Lorraine. I flipped through more pages. Hospital admission records from Cook County Psychiatric Ward. Discharge paperwork signed against medical advice. A brief note from a social worker dated 6 months after my birth. Attempted home visit to check on Lorraine Mitchell apartment abandoned. Landlord states tenant left 3 weeks ago. no forwarding address. No family contact information available. Case closed. My hands moved on autopilot now, sorting through the remaining envelopes. More letters, growing increasingly disjointed as the years passed. Some contained only a few sentences. Others rambled across multiple pages, the handwriting barely legible. I'm taking my medication now. Group home on the south side. They make me go to therapy 3 times a week. The therapist wants me to forget about you. She says it's healthier. But you're my baby. You'll always be my baby. Bad week. The shadows came back. Stop taking the pills because they make my hands shake, and I can't write to you when my hands shake. How will you know I'm thinking of you if I can't write? Are you happy? I hope you're happy. I hope they love you better than I could. The last envelope felt different, heavier. I opened it carefully, and a photograph slid out along with a single sheet of paper. The photo showed a woman in her 60s, standing outside a small brick building with a sign that read, Crossroads Residential Community. She looked directly at the camera with a tentative smile, and I recognized my own jawline, the set of my shoulders, the way one eyebrow arched slightly higher than the other. The letter was dated 3 months ago. I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me maybe 6 months. I've made peace with most things, but not you. Never you. I need to see your face one more time. I need to know you're real and whole and okay. I need to tell you I'm sorry. The facility address is on the back of this photo. Please, if you ever read these letters, please come. Story block 6. The GPS signal cut out twice on the 40-minute drive to the facility. I gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache, following half-remembered directions down increasingly narrow roads. Rain started halfway there. Not the gentle spring drizzle Chicago was known for, but sheets of water that turned the windshield into a blurred canvas even with the wipers on full blast. I pulled into the parking lot of Crossroads Residential Community just after 2 in the afternoon. The brick building looked smaller than it had in the photograph, more weathered. Paint peeled from the window frames. A chain-link fence surrounded a small courtyard where plastic chairs sat empty in the downpour. My legs wouldn't move when I tried to get out of the car. I sat there with the engine running, watching rain hammer the hood, feeling my heart slam against my ribs in an irregular rhythm that made me dizzy. The steering wheel was slick with sweat from my palms. I'd driven all this way, but my body refused to carry me the final 50 feet. A woman in scrubs ran from the building entrance to a car 3 spaces down, holding a newspaper over her head. She glanced at me through my window, a quick, curious look, before driving away. The parking lot emptied except for my car and a white van with the facility's logo on the side. I forced myself to open the door. Rain soaked through my jacket before I'd taken 3 steps. The automatic door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, releasing the smell of industrial cleaner and something else underneath it, the particular staleness of places where people went to be forgotten. A reception desk sat empty. I stood dripping on the linoleum, water pooling around my shoes, staring at a sign-in sheet attached to a clipboard. The last entry was from 2 days ago. I picked up the pen, then set it down without writing. My hands were shaking too badly to form letters. Can I help you? I turned to find a man in his 30s wearing a polo shirt with the facility logo embroidered on the chest. His name tag read Staff in place of an actual name. He carried a mop and bucket, but stopped when he saw my face. I'm looking for Lorraine Mitchell. She's a resident here. His expression shifted, something between pity and discomfort. He set down the bucket carefully, water sloshing over the rim. Room 1 to 12, down that hall, third door on the left. He paused, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. You family? The word stuck in my throat. I managed a nod. She doesn't get many visitors. Actually, you'd be the first since I started working here last October. He picked up his bucket again, moved past me toward a spill by the entrance. Fair warning, today's not one of her good days. I walked down the corridor he'd indicated. The walls were painted a shade of beige that seemed designed to induce depression. Motivational posters hung at intervals. One day at a time. Progress, not perfection. You are stronger than you know. Each one felt like a lie. Room 112's door stood partially open. I stopped outside it, pressed my palm against the wall to steady myself. My heart was racing again, that same irregular rhythm. Sweat ran down my spine despite the chill from my wet clothes. Through the gap in the door, I could see a narrow bed, a dresser, a window with bars painted white to look decorative. I pushed the door open wider. The woman from the photograph sat in a wheelchair by the window, her back to me. She'd lost weight since the picture was taken. A lot of weight. Her shoulders were sharp angles under a faded cardigan. Her hair, more gray than black now, hung limp to her collar. She was talking to herself in a low, steady murmur I couldn't make out. I stepped inside. The floor creaked under my weight. She didn't turn around. Lorraine? The murmuring stopped. Her shoulders tensed. For several long seconds, she didn't move at all. Then, slowly, she swiveled the wheelchair to face me. The resemblance was undeniable and terrible. Looking at her was like looking at a distorted mirror. All the familiar features were there, but rearranged by illness and time and circumstances I couldn't begin to understand. Her eyes, the same dark brown as mine, were red-rimmed and unfocused. She stared at me without recognition, her mouth working silently. Who are you? Her voice came out hoarse, suspicious. I didn't order anything. They always send people to try to sell me things I don't need. My throat constricted. I couldn't speak, couldn't form words around the knot of emotion threatening to choke me. She wheeled herself closer, squinting. You're not from the pharmacy. I know the pharmacy people. Her eyes narrowed further. Are you from the court? Because I already did my time. They can't make me go back. The words came out as a whisper. I tried again, louder. I got your letters. Her face went blank. Then something flickered behind her eyes, a spark of clarity that transformed her features. Her hands flew to her mouth. The wheelchair rolled backward slightly as her whole body jerked. No! The word was barely audible. No, you can't be. She burst into tears. Not gentle crying, but racking sobs that shook her entire frame. She doubled over, arms wrapped around herself, rocking back and forth. The sounds she made were animal-like, raw, with decades of accumulated grief. I stood frozen, unable to move forward or retreat. My own eyes burned, but no tears came. I felt disconnected from my body, watching the scene from somewhere outside myself. She looked up at me through her tears, reaching out with one trembling hand. Baby girl? My baby girl? You came. You really came. The word baby hit me like a physical blow. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. The edges of my vision darkened, tunneling down to just her face. This stranger claiming motherhood over 62 years of my life. I stumbled backward off the porch. My heel caught on the concrete step, and I went down hard, palms scraping against the rough walkway. Small stones embedded themselves in my skin. The pain felt distant, unimportant. Lorraine wheeled herself to the threshold, unable to follow me down the steps. Her hands gripped the wheels so tightly her knuckles went white. Please don't go. Please. I waited so long. I looked everywhere. They said you were dead. They told me my baby died, and I never believed them. I knew you were alive somewhere. I pushed myself up to sitting, feeling wetness on my palms where the skin had torn. Blood mixed with dirt in the creases of my hands. My breath came in short, painful gasps that didn't seem to deliver any oxygen to my lungs. A car pulled into the driveway behind me. The engine cut off, and a door slammed. Footsteps approached rapidly, a man's heavy tread on the concrete. He appeared in my peripheral vision, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing khaki work pants and a faded blue shirt with a name patch. "Mom, what's going on?" He moved past me quickly, taking the steps 2 at a time. "I got your message. You said it was an emergency." He crouched beside the wheelchair, his hand on Lorraine's shoulder. Then he turned to look at me, really look at me, and his face went slack with shock. His eyes moved between Lorraine and me, back and forth, recognition dawning in slow motion. Jesus Christ. He stood up abruptly. Are you your sister?" Lorraine's voice cracked on the words. "Daniel, this is your sister." The name hung in the air between us. Daniel, a brother, another person who existed in a family structure I never knew I had. I tried to process this information, but my brain felt sluggish, overloaded. My hands throbbed where the skin had scraped away. Daniel came down the steps toward me. I scrambled backward on the pavement, ignoring the pain shooting through my abraded palms. He stopped immediately, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. Okay. I'm not going to. Just let me help you up. You're bleeding." I looked down at my hands. Red streaked across both palms, mixed with grit and small pieces of gravel. I picked at a stone embedded near my thumb, pulling it free. A fresh bead of blood welled up in its place. "I need to leave." The words came out steady despite the chaos in my chest. "I shouldn't have come here." I got to my feet, swaying slightly. My rental car sat at the curb 20 feet away. 20 feet might as well have been 20 miles. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, responding sluggishly to my brain's commands. Daniel moved to block my path to the car, not aggressively but deliberately. Up close, I could see he had Lorraine's eyes. My eyes. The same deep brown, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners. His hair was graying at the temples, his face lined with years of outdoor work. He had to be in his 50s. "You can't just walk away. Do you know what this means to her? To us? Do you have any idea what she went through?" The anger in my chest flared hot and immediate. My hands clenched into fists despite the pain. "What she went through? What about what I went through? I lived 62 years believing I knew who I was. I had parents. I had a life. And now, I find out it was all built on a kidnapping. On someone stealing me and destroying every record of where I came from." My voice rose with each word until I was nearly shouting. Daniel flinched, but didn't back away. Behind him, Lorraine had wheeled herself to the edge of the porch, tears still streaming down her face. "They told me you died." Her words cut through my anger. "The hospital said there were complications. They showed me papers. Death certificates? I was 17 years old and high on pain medication, and they told me my baby was gone. I wanted to see you, to hold you, but they said it was better if I didn't. That I should remember you the way you were right after birth, perfect and pink and breathing." I pressed my bleeding palms against my thighs, leaving dark stains on my slacks. The physical sensation helped ground me, kept me from floating away into pure panic. Who did it? Who took me? Lorraine shook her head, the movement jerky and desperate. I don't know. I didn't know anything was wrong until years later when I tried to file paperwork to get your death certificate. There was no record. No record of you being born at that hospital. No record of you dying. Just blank spaces where my daughter should have been. Daniel pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. This is a federal crime. Kidnapping, falsifying documents, identity theft. No! The word exploded out of me. No police, not yet. I can't. I need time to think. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands, smearing blood across the screen. A text from Marcus, my husband. My chest constricted at the sight of his name. Marcus, who I'd been married to for 40 years. Marcus, who didn't know I'd flown across 3 states to chase down letters from a stranger claiming to be my mother. The message was simple. Call me when you get a chance. Love you. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the coffee table, spinning twice before settling face down. My vision tunneled, the edges going dark and fuzzy. The room tilted sideways. Daniel's hand gripped my elbow, steadying me, but I jerked away. I couldn't bear anyone touching me right now. Not even this man who might be my half-brother. Not even this stranger who'd upended my entire existence with his letters and his DNA tests and his impossible truths. The front door burst open. No knock, no warning. Just the sudden violent intrusion of wood slamming against drywall. A woman stood in the doorway, 60s, white, iron gray hair pulled back so tight it stretched the skin around her temples. She wore a navy pantsuit and carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive and well used. Behind her, 2 men flanked the entrance. Both younger, 30s maybe, with the kind of solid, purposeful builds that suggested security training, or worse. Lorraine Mitchell. The woman's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. You were told to stop. Lorraine scrambled backward, her wheelchair rolling until it hit the wall with a soft thump. The color drained from her already pale face, leaving her looking corpse-like in the afternoon light filtering through the blinds. Who the hell are you? Daniel moved forward, positioning himself between the intruders and his mother. The woman ignored him. Her eyes locked on mine instead, and something in that gaze made my spine go rigid. She knew exactly who I was. More than that, she'd been expecting this moment. Mrs. Jones, you need to come with me. Now. I stayed rooted to the floor, my bloody palms clenched into fists at my sides. Every instinct screamed danger, but my legs wouldn't move. Fight or flight, and I was frozen in between. I'm not going anywhere. The woman nodded, almost respectfully, then gestured to the men. They moved with practiced efficiency, one heading for Daniel, the other advancing on me. I saw Daniel throw a punch, watched it connect with the first man's jaw in a satisfying crack of flesh on bone. But the man barely flinched. He grabbed Daniel's arm, twisted it behind his back, and forced him to his knees in one fluid motion. The second man reached for me. I didn't think, just reacted. My hand shot out, nails raking across his face, drawing 4 parallel lines of blood from temple to chin. He grunted, but didn't stop. His fingers closed around my wrist like a vice. I drove my knee up, aiming for his groin. He twisted, taking the blow on his thigh instead, then yanked me forward so hard I felt something pop in my shoulder. Pain exploded down my arm, white-hot and nauseating. I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat before I could stop it. Please! Lorraine's voice, high and desperate. Don't hurt her. She doesn't know anything. The woman in the doorway finally moved, crossing the room in measured steps. She pulled a syringe from her briefcase, the needle catching the light. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. "This doesn't have to be difficult," the woman said, uncapping the syringe with her teeth. "You can walk out of here conscious and calm, or you can wake up somewhere else. Your choice." I thrashed, kicking backward, my heel connecting with the man's shin. He didn't release me. Instead, he wrapped his other arm around my throat, cutting off my air supply. Black spots danced across my vision. My lungs burned. I clawed at his arm, my fingernails breaking against his sleeve. "The hospital," Lorraine wheezed. "St. Catherine's. Dr. Howard Finch ran the adoption ring. He's still alive. He's in Portland. Please, just let her go, and I'll tell you everything." The pressure on my throat eased slightly. I gasped, sucking in air that tasted like copper and fear. The woman paused, syringe hovering inches from my neck. "Finch is dead. Heart attack 3 months ago." "Then Gerald Krause was his lawyer. He handled all the paperwork, the falsified documents. He has records, names, locations of all the babies they stole." My chest heaved, each breath painful. The room spun. I could feel my consciousness slipping, whether from lack of oxygen or pure shock. I couldn't tell. The man's arm remained locked around my throat, ready to squeeze again at any moment. The woman studied Lorraine for a long, terrible moment. Then she nodded, and the man released me. I collapsed forward, catching myself on my hands and knees. Blood from my palms smeared across the hardwood floor. I dry heaved, my empty stomach clenching. "You have 48 hours to disappear," the woman said, looking down at me. "Go home to your husband. Forget about Lorraine Mitchell. Forget about Daniel. Forget everything you learned today. If you pursue this, if you contact authorities, if you tell anyone what happened here, we'll know. And next time, I won't be asking nicely." She turned and walked out, her men following. The door clicked shut behind them with soft finality. I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, counting my breaths until the trembling subsided. Blood continued to drip from my hands onto the hardwood, creating small crimson pools that spread and merged. The metallic taste in my mouth reminded me how close I'd come to dying in this stranger's living room. Finally, I pushed myself up, using the coffee table for support. My legs threatened to buckle. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. Lorraine remained slumped in her chair, her breathing shallow and ragged. The restraints had left deep red marks on her wrists and ankles. I stumbled toward her, my fingers fumbling with the zip ties. They'd been pulled so tight that the plastic had cut into her skin. I found a kitchen knife in the drawer and sawed through them, one by one. Lorraine slumped forward when the last restraint gave way. I caught her before she hit the floor. "We need to get you help," I said. "No hospitals. They'll find us." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Gerald Krause, he's in Seattle. I have his address." She directed me to a lockbox hidden beneath the floorboards in her bedroom closet. Inside, I found stacks of documents, photographs, and a leather-bound notebook filled with handwritten entries. Names, dates, locations. My hands shook as I flipped through pages documenting dozens of stolen babies, maybe hundreds. I found myself on page 47. Baby girl, born March 3rd, 1962. St. Catherine's Hospital, Portland. Mother, deceased. Father, Daniel Mitchell, Lorraine's brother. Adoptive parents, Carl and Patricia Jones. The notebook slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. I sank down beside it, my back against the wall. Everything I'd believed about my parents, about my childhood, about my identity, all of it built on stolen moments and forged documents. Lorraine appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage on her shoulder, creating a dark stain that spread across her shirt. "Your father loved your mother so much," she said. "When she died giving birth to you, he fell apart, started drinking, lost his job. Child Services was going to take you. Daniel came to me begging for help. I introduced him to Dr. Finch." I stood up, my legs steadier now. The shock was hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. "So you sold me. I saved you. The Joneses gave you everything. A good home, education, stability. Daniel got money to get back on his feet. Everyone won. Except me. Except everyone who lost their identity, their heritage, their truth." I picked up the notebook and shoved it into my bag along with handfuls of documents. "We're going to Seattle. You're going to help me find Gerald Krause, and then you're going to help me make this right." Lorraine started to protest, but I cut her off with a look that must have mirrored the rage burning through my chest. She nodded slowly and shuffled toward the bedroom to pack. We left her house after dark, taking back roads to avoid cameras. I drove while Lorraine dozed fitfully in the passenger seat, occasionally waking with small cries of pain. The dashboard clock glowed 3:47 a.m. when we crossed into Washington State. Gerald Krause lived in a modest ranch house in the suburbs north of Seattle. I parked 2 blocks away and helped Lorraine out of the car. Dawn was still hours away. The street lay silent and empty, illuminated only by occasional streetlights, casting pools of amber on the wet pavement. I picked the lock on Krause's back door, using techniques I'd learned during a brief stint covering crime stories early in my journalism career. The mechanism clicked open after 30 seconds of careful manipulation. We slipped inside, closing the door softly behind us. The house smelled like old books and furniture polish. Family photographs lined the hallway walls. Gerald Krause with his wife, children, grandchildren. All of them smiling, unaware that their comfortable life had been built on stolen babies and falsified records. I found him in the master bedroom, asleep in a hospital-style bed with safety rails. Medical equipment beeped softly beside him. An oxygen tank hissed in the corner. He looked ancient, his skin translucent and paper-thin, his breathing labored. Lorraine touched my arm. "He had a stroke last year. He can barely speak." I pulled up a chair beside the bed and switched on the reading lamp. Krause's eyes fluttered open, squinting against the sudden light. When he saw Lorraine, recognition flickered across his face, followed immediately by fear. "We need the records," I said. "All of them. Every baby you and Finch stole. Every document you forged. Everything!" Krause's mouth worked soundlessly. He gestured weakly toward a roll-top desk in the corner. I opened it and found a false bottom beneath the main drawer. Inside lay 3 thick folders containing meticulous records of every illegal adoption facilitated over 3 decades. My hands trembled as I photographed each page with my phone, the camera shutter clicking rapidly in the quiet room. Names, birth certificates, adoption papers, payment records, evidence of a conspiracy that had destroyed and rebuilt countless lives. When I finished, I looked at Krause. He stared back at me with watery eyes, his expression impossible to read. Regret? Defiance? Fear of what was coming? "You have 24 hours to decide," I told him. "Either you contact the authorities yourself and confess everything, or I release these documents to every major news outlet in the country. Your choice." We left the same way we'd entered, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. I drove Lorraine to a motel near the airport and paid for a week in advance using cash. She stood in the doorway of her room, looking smaller and more fragile than when we'd met. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide who you want to be when this is over." I turned and walked back to my car without looking back. 6 months later. The cherry blossoms fell like snow across the park bench where I sat, their petals catching in my newly short hair. I'd cut it myself 3 weeks ago, standing in front of my bathroom mirror at 2 in the morning, scissors in hand, watching decades of carefully maintained length drop into the sink. The woman staring back at me had looked like a stranger. I'd smiled at her. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. He sent them every Tuesday now, short messages about his garden or a book he was reading. Nothing profound, just proof that he was still there, still trying. I typed back a response about the cherry blossoms, then slid the phone into my jacket pocket. The manila folder on my lap contained the final paperwork from the genealogy service. My biological father's information sat inside, complete with his current address in Seattle and contact details for 2 half-siblings I'd never met. I'd opened the folder twice since it arrived last week, but I hadn't actually read beyond the first line. Some mornings I woke up ready to call. Other mornings I woke up grateful for the silence. A jogger passed, her breath coming in steady rhythms, ponytail swinging. I watched her disappear around the curve of the path, her certainty about her own trajectory so complete, it seemed almost fictional. 6 months ago, I'd had that same certainty. Now I understood it for what it was, a comfortable delusion we told ourselves to keep moving forward. The bench's wooden slats pressed against my spine as I leaned back. Above me, branches created a canopy of white and pink, the morning sun filtering through in scattered patches. I'd discovered this park 2 weeks after Patricia's funeral, driving aimlessly through neighborhoods I didn't recognize until the car seemed to park itself. Now I came here every Tuesday morning, sitting in this exact spot, watching the world continue its indifferent rotation. Patricia had died quietly in her sleep, 3 months after my confrontation with Kraus. The hospital called at dawn, their professional sympathy washing over me like static. I'd stood in her room afterward, looking at the collection of framed photographs on her dresser. Every single one of them a lie she'd maintained with such desperate conviction that she'd taken it to her grave. I'd left them there when I cleaned out her apartment. Let someone else deal with her carefully constructed fiction. The folder felt heavier than it should. I opened it properly this time, letting my eyes track across the genealogical report. My biological father's name was Timothy Walsh. He'd become a high school math teacher, married once, divorced twice, and had 3 children from various relationships. The genealogists had included a recent photograph, a man with silver hair and laugh lines, throwing a frisbee to a golden retriever in someone's backyard. He looked happy. The thought sat in my chest like a stone. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Lorraine. She'd testified against Kraus and the remaining members of the adoption ring, her voice steady in the courtroom as she detailed 3 decades of systematic child trafficking. The prosecutors had offered her immunity in exchange for her cooperation. She'd taken it, then immediately checked herself into a long-term rehabilitation facility in Arizona. Her text was longer than Daniel's. She'd started attending art therapy sessions, painting landscapes that her counselor said showed remarkable emotional depth. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to visit next month, maybe spend a weekend talking about everything that had happened. Or not talking about it, whatever I needed. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, trying to find words that accurately captured the complicated tangle of emotions that came with her name. Eventually, I just typed, "Maybe, I'll let you know." The park filled gradually with morning activity. A woman pushed a stroller past my bench, talking animatedly on her phone. Two elderly men played chess at a nearby table, their moves deliberate and considered. A teenager skateboarded along the path, wheels clattering against concrete. All of them moved through space with such casual ownership of their own narratives. I pulled out the second document from my jacket, the deed to Patricia's house. My house now, legally speaking. The lawyer had explained the transfer with practiced efficiency, sliding papers across his desk for my signature. I'd signed without reading them closely, my hand moving on autopilot while my brain floated somewhere above my body. The house sat empty now. I'd tried living there for 2 weeks after the funeral, sleeping in my old bedroom, making coffee in Patricia's kitchen, watching television on her couch. But the walls seemed to pulse with her presence, every corner holding some artifact of the elaborate performance she'd maintained for 62 years. I'd locked the door and moved into a small apartment downtown, one bedroom with large windows and no history attached to its walls. A cardinal landed on the branch directly above me, its red plumage stark against the pale blossoms. It cocked its head, regarding me with one black eye, then burst back into flight with a flash of crimson wings. I'd started teaching art classes at the community center 3 months ago. Nothing fancy, just basic painting techniques for seniors and beginners. But standing in front of a canvas, showing someone else how to mix colors or control a brush, felt like the first honest work I'd done in years. The students called me by my first name, asked about my weekend plans, invited me to coffee afterward. They knew nothing about my past, nothing about Patricia or Lorraine, or the years I'd spent teaching children who weren't mine. My retirement colleagues had reached out initially. Sympathy cards, awkward phone calls, invitations to lunch that felt more like obligations than genuine offers. I'd declined them all politely, then stopped responding entirely. That version of myself, the devoted teacher who'd spent 30 years shaping young minds while her own identity crumbled like rotting wood, felt like someone I'd read about in a novel. I couldn't reconnect with her, even if I wanted to. The genealogy report listed my biological mother's information too. She died in a car accident when I was 5. A real accident this time, not another manufactured story. No grandparents, no extended family on her side. Just Timothy Walsh and the half-siblings who'd grown up knowing their father, while I'd been raised by a woman whose love had been built entirely on theft. I folded the report carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then I took out my phone and opened a new message to Timothy Walsh's email address, which the genealogists had included in their final packet. My fingers hung suspended over the keyboard for several minutes, the cursor blinking expectantly. Finally, I began typing. My name is Amber Jones. I believe you're my biological father. I'm not sure what I want from this message, or if I want anything at all, but I thought you should know that I exist. I read it 3 times before hitting send, watching the message disappear into the digital void with a soft whoosh. Then I turned off my phone completely and sat in the falling blossoms, feeling nothing and everything simultaneously. The chess players packed up their board. The woman with the stroller circled back past my bench. The teenager attempted a trick that sent his skateboard clattering into a trash can. Life continued its relentless forward momentum, indifferent to my personal reconstruction. I stood eventually, brushing cherry blossom petals from my jeans. The park stretched out before me in multiple directions, different paths leading to different destinations, none of them predetermined. I could walk toward the parking lot and drive back to my empty apartment. I could head toward the lake and sit on the dock watching boats drift past. I could turn left and find the coffee shop where I'd seen a "Help Wanted" sign in the window last week. Instead, I chose a path I'd never taken before. One that curved behind a grove of willow trees toward a section of the park I hadn't explored. My feet moved steadily forward, carrying me towards something new, something undefined, something entirely my own. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.